All right, welcome everybody. Getting a little late, so I know we're before lunch. So we're gonna do introductions of our panelists as we get to them. So I'll start with myself. I'm Chris Price. I am, and I apologize for the floating meeting controls. So I'm just gonna leave them. I think that's just, we're gonna have to just leave them up there. But then I can't advance the slides. Oh. I am the Academic Programs Manager for the SUNY Center for Professional Development. I also coordinate the SUNY Innovative Instruction Technology Grant Program. So the project that you're going to be hearing about today was funded with SUNY Innovative Instruction Technology Grant funds last year. My phone needs to get over there too, which is messing with the mic. Our panelists, you see their names there. We're going to have them introduce themselves later when we get to the Q&A part with the panelists. So I'm just going to go ahead and say a few words about the project. Then I'm going to turn over to Rachael, who is the co-PI for the project, and then we'll have our questions for our panelists. So Kim did mention the SUNY Innovative Instruction Technology Grant Program, otherwise known as IITG, which for many years was shepherded by our colleague Lisa Stevens. Over there's Lisa. And Lisa handed it off to myself and the SUNY Center for Professional Development around 2019-20, and we had a little bit of a pause on the program. Before I get to that, I'll just say, the Innovative Instruction Technology Grant Program started in 2012, and it's designed to help kind of look for and help campuses, and specifically staff and faculty on campuses, to develop innovative projects that we can hopefully scale throughout SUNY. So it's kind of an R&D fund. And it's really meant to promote innovation and promote experimentation with the hope that we can scale projects across the system. So here's, I don't know why it's doing that. I'll just stand back a little bit, maybe that'll help. Yeah, so here are the, what, and I just mentioned what, the IITG does, but it's allocated to, again, replicate campus successes, transcend campus boundaries, promote collaboration across campuses, and build communities of practice once, we have a project is successful. And then, pretty much figure out how to share evidence of impact of what IITG funds and support what we're doing in SUNY, and again, scale up our successes. So yeah, we had an RFP in 2020. We had all the proposals reviewed. The Innovative Instruction Research Council, who oversee the program, met, made selections and recommendations to the provost. And then we just waited and waited and waited and crossed our fingers that we were able to fund some of the projects. And it turned out that we couldn't fund any of those projects in 2020. So again, we were paused. And then in late 21, we found out, oh, we do have funds again for IITG. It was a little late in the process at that point to put out a full RFP for the program like we just released and which just closed back in last month. And so we came up with these two projects to look at two kind of strategic priorities that we have in the system. One, looking at HyFlex courses, and that's the one we're going to talk about today. Another one looking at large enrollment courses and technology tools for large enrollment courses. So I'm happy to talk about the large enrollment course project offline or after the session. So what are HyFlex courses? I know there's some other sessions at the summit about HyFlex. So really the upshot of a HyFlex course is that students have the choice of how they're going to attend your course. And students can either attend your course face-to-face, they can attend your course synchronously online using Zoom or another piece of technology, which we'll talk about today, or they can attend your course in an online asynchronous format. So it's really about student choice, and it's really about meeting students' needs, especially students that have busy family lives, that are working, that appreciate the flexibility about how they engage with their course. And so HyFlex obviously became very popular with the pandemic and the move to remote. And so, and there's been a lot of work done by the HyFlex Collaborative, for example. Many of you might know Brian Beatty at San Francisco State, who's done a lot of work on HyFlex courses. And there's been a lot of research around HyFlex. And so, the SUNY priorities you see there kind of really meets nicely those priorities as well, trying to support post-traditional adult learners, help them build competencies, but also really design HyFlex courses well so that they can, improve student learning, student success, and help students complete programs because of the flexibility that they provide. So why focus on tools? So we didn't want to do a complete research project on the efficacy of HyFlex courses. The idea of IATG is to be a little more targeted than that. And so one of the things that we were hearing from campuses is, and we were getting approached at the CPD and in-system by companies that have put together tools that are specifically video conferencing tools that are specifically designed for teaching and learning. So the two that we looked at for this project that fall into this category are Class, otherwise known as Class for Zoom, and a company called Engagely, and a tool that they created called Engagely. And then the other tools that we wanted to look at were Microsoft Teams, since pretty much every campus has access to Microsoft Teams. And then of course, Zoom, right? Everybody is using Zoom at some point. Not all campuses use Zoom, right? Some campuses, the state made the decision not to use Zoom and they're using Teams exclusively. And so we wanted to see, okay, is there a significant difference between these tools that are more all-purpose, general video conferencing tools and those that were specifically designed for teaching and learning? And so we put a call out for participants, faculty, who are teaching a HyFlex course in either the fall of 2022 or the spring of 23. We asked them to, make a proposal and we were going to pay for the tool if they needed it. So if they wanted to use a tool that their campus wasn't currently paying for, we paid for that. They got a stipend because they were asked to do training in the summer of 22, and they were also asked to help participate in the research and the surveys that we did. So in 22, we had Brian Beatty and the HyFlex Collaborative do a week-long workshop for all the participants. And then we also were able to hire an instructional designer, Steve Sturman. I saw Steve, he's online. So Steve worked with the folks who are involved in the project and helped them with their course design. We were really committed to having high quality courses in the project. We didn't want folks to have issues with their design. We really wanted that to be a baseline level of everyone in the program had a high quality course. So in the summer, after they did that, they redesigned their courses. If they hadn't taught HyFlex before, they learned how to use the tool if the tool was new to them. And then they taught their courses last semester, and many of them are actually teaching them now as well. And they had meetings throughout. We had some check-ins, meeting with vendors, that sort of thing, the training for their tool, additional training. And so the numbers that we have so far, I say so far because the numbers have gone down a bit, as things happen, and Chris, I was going to teach the HyFlex course in the spring and it just didn't happen, so I need to drop out, and that's fine. So here's where we're at now. So we had 30 folks in the fall of 22, and then we have 23 currently teaching. And I also say, it's not on the slide here, but we had a pretty much equal distribution between folks from 2-year community college campuses. So I think we're 11 community college campuses and then 9 of the 4-year campuses. And we also had a nice spread along disciplines too. You'll hear that from our panelists in a minute. So tool choice, in an ideal world, we would have had a 50-50 split, right? We would have had half of the folks using either Zoom or Teams and half are using Class or Engagely. Because this was a real world, kind of like an action research project and not a controlled study, we gave the faculty discretion over what tool they use. We didn't say, you're all assigned to this condition and you're all assigned to that condition. We said, well, what do you practically want to, use? What's going to work for you? And so while we had, many more folks initially sign up to use Class or Engagely, some of them kind of slid back and said, you know what, Chris, I was going to use Class, but I just didn't have time to learn it, so we're going to use Zoom. And and again, we really wanted this to be a real world research project, so we said, okay, sometimes reluctantly. We also really didn't want to include tools like WebEx or Collaborate, because we know that campuses are kind of trending away from using those tools. But we had a couple folks who said, the classroom I have, WebEx is integrated into the classroom. Can I use it? And so we reluctantly said, okay. And the same with Collaborate. I learned about Collaborate like after the fact. The faculty member said, I use Collaborate. I didn't use Class. I was like, all right. And then we had a faculty member actually at Poly use Discord. He had some, he said it didn't go exactly the way he expected, but we allowed that because we're like, that's kind of cool, right? That's where students are already. So he used Discord, and that was the other tool. All right, so for the research project plan, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rachael Hagerman from Upstate.
Good morning. So our research plan, our question was, what is the effective video conferencing tool choice on the implementation for the design and the delivery of HyFlex courses? So we had 3 components that we were looking at. We had an initial survey, attendance and data collection portion, and a student or end of semester survey. The initial survey was just for faculty members, and in that survey, we looked at general demographic information, like what type of course are you teaching, we tried to categorize the courses so we could look at potentially comparing how well it worked for different types of courses and for programs, major, non-major, gen ed, that type of thing. We also were looking at feedback on how the training for their particular tool went. So as they did the training over the summer and completed the course, we wanted to know, did you like the training? Was there improvement? What worked, what didn't work with training? We also wanted to look at their comfort level with incorporating HyFlex. Have they taught HyFlex before? How many courses? What did they use? And we also wanted to look at their comfort level with integrating technology into their classroom. So we identified a survey tool called TPAC that was a self-assessment that looked at how they integrated their comfort level at integrating technology into that classroom. The attendance data that we had them collect was to keep track per week throughout the semester. So we said on average, obviously every semester and every course is going to be offered a different number of times per week. So we didn't want to have to kind of solve for that. So we said, give us the average for the week for attendance for the students. So we created a tool for them to use to track every single week. And we also collected the final course grade for that, or whether or not they withdrew. The tool, we had them redact the student names and then send the results to us. And at the end of the semester, we had an end of semester survey for both students and faculty members. And really that was just looking at, how did it go? What do you think? How did it go? What was beneficial about the tool? What was it, some negatives about using the tool? What would you do different next time? The student survey was slightly shorter. We didn't ask as many questions, both because they didn't have training and didn't have to implement the tool, but also we wanted them to actually complete the survey. So we didn't want it to be really long. And so we had a few shorter questions, but really asking how they felt the integration of the tool worked in their classroom, and whether or not they thought it was beneficial and what recommendations they might have for faculty implementing this in the future. So then if we look at our participation, so the attendance data that we collected, this is what we looked at, although our title is cut off. So the attendance pattern is based on a weekly attendance. So you can see, oh, there we go. So you can see that the per week, we only did 15 weeks out for all of the data because all of the courses at least met for 15 weeks. Some also met for 16 weeks, but I just included the 15 weeks that we had data for every course for. The blue shows the classroom attendance, orange is asynchronous attendance or synchronous attendance, gray is asynchronous, yellow is non-attendance for that week. And the last blue column, which you see showing up later in the semester, is students who have lived. You can kind of see the pattern. There is a predictable pattern with HyFlex courses that you can see kind of demonstrated. There is a slight decline in classroom attendance as the semester kind of works its way through. What was a little surprising to me, though, is we didn't see a dramatic increase in the synchronous attendance that you sometimes see as your classroom attendance go down, the asynchronous attendance goes up. It was a small increase, but not as significant as I expected, honestly. And then the synchronous attendance remained fairly consistent throughout the semester. So the students who chose that option from the beginning pretty much stuck it through all the way through. So then the next slide is the participation patterns by final grade. So for this slide, we looked at We did collect the final grades. I based the grades just on A, B, C, and D because every class has a different, or every campus has a different distribution of A pluses and minuses and all the way through. So we batched based on whole grade. And again, the same types of categories. We had 338 A's, 123 B's, 58 C's, 22 D's, 44 F's, 25 W's. There's a smattering of other grades that were either typos or E grades. I'm not sure what that is, so I have to do some research on what an E grade is.
It's an F at some schools, like
Okay,
Rockland.
all right.
Rockland is
So I was a little thrown off by that. So again, the same color patterns are demonstrated here. The blue is the classroom, orange is synchronous, gray is asynchronous. So this was really interesting for us because we didn't really see a huge difference in the types of attendance related to what their final grade was. What I will say is this, all of this data that we're looking at here is just for the fall semester. So we still have classes in session for the spring semester, and there is some data that is missing from this that came in a format that needs a lot more work to be able to be integrated. And we wanted to be able to share some of this today. So it's a little interesting to kind of look at that distribution.
So before you go on, we just have a few slides. We didn't include all the data. This is all preliminary data. Come to the CIT conference, we'll have more data.
We'll have everything.
And then there's actually the HyFlex, there's a HyFlex conference at University of Albany at end of June. And we'll hopefully present the full, results at that conference.
And we also did not break any of our data up by tools at this point. We just are looking holistically at what we have. So the end of semester survey participation, we're really interested in this. So you can see the number of individuals who responded. We were really pleased with the number of students who responded. It was a pretty high number and distributed among most of the tools. So we were really pleased with what type of distribution pattern that we had. So looking at the end of semester survey results. So we asked a series of Likert questions for both the faculty and the students. And so these were kind of the responses of those Likert questions summarized kind of in one group because we wanted you to have more of the time to talk with the faculty. So the Likert questions here was based on their experience of the tool. What was interesting or informative is that all of the questions received at least a 50 or above for agree or strongly agree. So they seemed pleased with the type of experience that they had with that particular tool. The students also had similar questions, not exactly the same. We were kind of targeting them slightly different. But they had actually, what was surprising is a stronger positive response to the tool and to the integration than the faculty did, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. So they really found everything to be far more favorable than the faculty members did. So then we asked a series of short answer questions at the end of the survey, and we then analyzed the qualitative data and went through a process of qualitative analysis. So the faculty question, let's get a slide.
Nope.
Yep, I did.
Oh, good. No, that's right. A positive first.
Oh yes, the positive. So the faculty question that we asked to kind of look at the positive theme was, what are the positive features of the tool? The faculty focused a great deal on how easy it was to use. How easy is this? How easy is it for me? How easy is it for the students to use? And that was overall one of the biggest responses, as well as recording. Recording came up over and over and over again in all of the results. The next was the positive aspects with the student survey. And so here the question was, what did you like about using the particular technology tool? The students also emphasized ease of use. Ease of use was really big, as well as accessibility to the resources. So they also referenced recording a lot, but in having access to the recordings after class. And so a lot of their comments are generated around how easily do I have access to those and how easily can I get to them and where are they stored? They also were crazy about flexibility. Like the first word out of all of their mouths in that comment section was love the flexibility, love the flexibility, love the flexibility. which is not. Then we looked at the negative aspect of the tool. For faculty, the question was, what are the negative features in the tool? The classroom management was the biggest category here, and really related to managing all of the modalities at once. So the challenge associated with that, as well as figuring out how to get the tool to do what they wanted it to do in the classroom that they had. So it was kind of a combination of technical implementation and classroom management that the faculty really focused on. Another challenge that they noted was challenges with recording and the specifics of where the recordings went, and some of that had to do with bright space being implemented as all of this was happening, and so some of that may go away when we look at the next set of responses in the spring. The students, the question we asked them was, what did you dislike about the technology tool? The most popular answer was none, by a lot. They didn't really have anything to say. The people who did respond were, again, mostly related to classroom management and execution of that modality. A lot of the students talked about how they wanted to have more interaction. We have this tool, but you're not utilizing us in the classroom as an asynchronous attendance. So being able to have that interaction, a greater interaction with the class that's there. There was a number of comments on that, as well as making sure that the faculty was aware of what they were putting on the screen. So they thought they were showing something on the screen, and it really was not showing up for the asynchronous students. And because for most of these, the chat's not visible for the faculty member didn't know that nothing was showing up. So unless the students came to class with a laptop and could pull up a chat to see, so classroom management. The last question that we asked was around improvement. So for faculty, it was, if you're going to use the same tool in the future in a HyFlex course, what are you going to do differently? The top answers were really related to technical execution. Having a better handle on how I can use this type of classroom I want, the type of tools that I want, is the classroom set up correctly? And making sure it's as easy as possible, and also that they would spend more time working with the tool before they actually used it, so that they felt a lot more comfortable. If they were apprehensive about using it, and if it didn't work easily, it wasn't going to be used. And for the students, their question was, what are some recommendations you would make to an instructor using this same tool in the future? Their most popular answer, again, was none, again, by a lot. But those that did answer, again, were related to that classroom management piece. I'd really like the faculty member to be able to incorporate that synchronous component. That's what I have.
Great. Oh, all right. Thank you, Rachel. So, we went through, you got the project details, some of our quantitative responses to the survey results, some of the open responses, and now you have the real deal. You have the people who actually did it here or are doing it, right? So I'm going to actually stop my share so I can pull up the questions I'm going to ask them. But the first thing I wanted to do was to ask them each to introduce themselves, and then let us know what course they taught and why they wanted to teach it as HyFlex. And we'll start with that question, and I guess we'll start down to end with Liz.
Okay. So my name is Liz Brownell, and I teach at FLCC. I teach art. And the course that I taught was graphic design 1. And I wanted to teach at HyFlex to meet students where they're at. Some of them are working full time and wanted to be able to make it so that wherever they were, they could get an equal experience.
My name is Mark Darcy, and I teach in the mathematics department at Alfred State College. And I taught a senior level engineering statistics course, and I chose that because it felt like the group of students was a self-motivated group of students, and it would be easy to give them flexibility without potentially detracting from their experience in the classroom and the objectives of things.
My name is Jodilynn Greico. I am English faculty at Rockland. I also run the academic side of the concurrent enrollment programs. So my interest was twofold because I had high school instructors who were also looking at multiple modalities of instruction. I taught English 101, 098, which in our college is an ALP model where the students, there are 24 in the room, 14 are tested straight into 101, and 10 tested with the need of an additional module for support. So that's the 098 portion. The reason I chose HyFlex is because I think I was doing it anyway. The way that students are, and I try to be as flexible as possible in the community college. I have innumerable students that are trying to fit this in around their families and their careers, and I'm very grateful that I have that opportunity.
My name is Steve Schneider. I teach at SUNY College. I taught a HyFlex class in the fall, the information design class, designing and writing interactive texts, mostly with majors. It was a 300 level class, so I kind of echoed the notion of a committed group of students who are slightly higher level. And the current semester, I'm teaching two 200 level classes, one in communications, an introduction to digital media and society class, and another political science class. I wanted to teach HyFlex. I'm not sure why. Mostly because I'll try almost anything new, and I'm always up for different innovations. Within the program that I'm most concerned about, the communications media design and interactive media and game design program, we have some interest in moving those whole programs to a HyFlex modality. And so there are several of us in the program who are experimenting with this, and we're going to see if it works or not. So there's an introduction.
I'm Simone Reynolds. I'm from SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. Mouthful. Why did I teach HyFlex? We were last fall was our second full year of integrating HyFlex in our MPH program. The course I taught was a merged course, two different epidemiology research methods courses, one at the MPH level and one at the BRPH level. We combined those two sections into one just because of how small the doctoral class is. So it's two separate classes. It's co-taught as one course. And
That's fine, but we're going to do this. I'm going to ask the next question of all of you, and then we'll kind of just jump around and answer if you want.
Okay.
So, and we'll start with you. We'll go the other way. Simone.
Okay.
Which tool did you use, and why did you choose the tool that you chose for your HyFlex work?
so I chose the tool Engagely, and I noticed there are only two of us. So so why did I choose Engagely? So this fall would have been my second year teaching HyFlex, and one of the issues that we tended to have is that you're expecting a higher number of students to be active, whether that be in person or synchronous. And in our use case, what was happening, we were having a minimum, say, of 50% being asynchronous, and then that number would fluctuate during the semester with those that were synchronous. Moving towards that, and in our use case, we often had 0 students or 1 student, depending on the size of the class. So my goal was to try to find a way to provide more support in my design to the asynchronous students, since they made up a large chunk of what we were seeing. And so some of the features that I liked about Engagely, for example, there was a playback room. And so what we were using before was Zoom. And so pretty much it would be just a straightforward recording that students would be accessing. And so with Engagely, they had a playback room. They could meet as a group, and I was using group work. And so they could meet as a group, join that session, go through that video recording as a group. If there were polls or any activities that were in the course, they could interact with that as if they're part of that live session by, the polls would show up at the time it showed up in the previous course, and their responses would be added to that poll. So they're getting some of the interactive features that they would have had they been in the live session. The other features I chose, or why I chose Engagely, there was the feel of sitting at tables. So you could set up ahead of time tables for students to sit at, or once they're in the room, they could choose a table to sit at. So they could sit with friends and they could have a conversation. I know it may sound like, you don't want a conversation while you're in class, while you're lecturing, but they had the ability to interact with their peers at their table during a class session without you having to trigger a breakout room. And so there are two modes. You could have a podium mode and then you have a table mode. And so you could trigger the breakout mode, which would be the table mode, where you're now having the students have that time to participate or interact at the table. But you could also have some feature of that happening while you were in the session as the instructor at the podium. So there are a lot of different features that I wanted to recreate for active students in that live session, as well as for asynchronous students. There are other features too that I liked. I liked having a separate chat from the Q&A, which may sound weird. And then there's also a note feature. So one of the things I loved about the note feature, which is not possible in Zoom, is I could put notes in my note window that would stay for the entire semester. The same would be for students. So if they were making notes in the class, it would stick with the system. And so every time they log back in, you know, those things were there. I would throw links in that I would need to potentially refer to on the fly in class if the student asked something. I had a lot of material on the LMS, and so if I needed to send them back there, I could just go through my notes, grab the link and send it there. So it was nice having a lot of that in a central area. I also liked the ability to see what was happening in a breakout session based on, you had these color codes that would sort of show you how active a table was or how active an individual student was. And so if needs be, if you saw a table that wasn't really showing much interaction, you could sort of jump in and check in. Other feature that I absolutely liked, but wasn't really able to use based on my turnout, but would have been awesome if I had a larger turnout, was you could designate a table as a staff table. And so if a student needed to speak to you privately, the premise was you could join them at this table and speak privately. In reality, after the fact, would it really work? Because if I'm in the classroom using that setup, anybody who's in the class with me would then be hearing that conversation because I'm using that tool. So in my case, one of the reasons I liked it was also one of the reasons I couldn't use it. But again, my numbers are small where it was open enough where we could have that conversation live without needing to take it elsewhere. Those are the reasons I chose it.
Thanks. Well, I should have said too, I know, you know, we didn't have, we really could use 3 hours for the session because we'd show you the tool, but if you haven't seen Engagely, it's the most different than your typical video conference tools versus all the other tools. And that's probably why the fewest people chose to use it, because the cognitive load was really high for them to have to learn that and then maybe teach it a new modality. Did you want to ask an Engagely question? Okay, can we hold off to just, I want everybody to go and then we could maybe open it up. So Steve.
I think I made a huge mistake. Because, and so I chose Zoom, really very practical and potentially short-sighted reasons. Because it was there, because I knew it was going to be there, and because I knew it was going to work on my campus. And so maybe everybody feels this way about their campus, but nothing ever works at SUNY College as far as I know. And I knew that Zoom was going to work, and I was really worried about buying into a system that ultimately wasn't going to be there. And so I ended up using Zoom. I tried using classes or class, and it doesn't work the first time, didn't work the second time, and then I'm done. But I really wish that I had engaged with Engagely a bit more. And I think, Chris, you're right that initial load during that summertime was just, I guess, in retrospect, more than I can bear or could have. Zoom is fine. I had really small classes, unfortunately, perhaps, but fewer than maybe 15 students or 18 students like that. And I think a system like Engagely that requires almost a critical mass to take advantage of it seemed that it wasn't going to work for me. And so I just used Zoom. And I had no troubles with it. I think it created the recorded cloud solved all the problems. And given that my classes are so small, we really didn't need anything that was going to facilitate interaction. I don't do any group work in those classes. Not super happy with the HyFlex classes that I created, especially because I think that the asynchronous students were not well served by my design. So that's a retrospective correction to make. And I'm not sure, you know, I don't know if class is better or Zoom is better based on my experience. Like I said, Zoom kind of worked. I knew it was going to be there and I could rely on it. And those were really the most important factors that I ended up choosing. Kind of wish I'd done engagement. I'll spend the rest of my time to hear more about it.
Question Zoom. And I feel like this will be the most short response I'll ever give in my life, but I was concerned that the students would burst into flames if I tried to expose them to yet another system. And I was concerned about my ability to manage all the modalities. I'm very about engagement. I watch faces a lot. I'm a humanities person. I need to see you that you're getting it. And with Zoom, I had a rule about I worked within, we were talking about this idea of someone who might not want to have their face on the screen. I had young parents who were really appreciative of the modality, but sticking specifically with Zoom, it was the one that we all knew. And I have a lot of tricks in there that I already knew how to do. So I wanted one thing that I was confident about as I went into my class.
I decided to use Teams, and basically that decision was motivated because it's what we were transitioning to for our virtual classroom on our campus as we moved away from Blackboard and to we're calling it Mind Learning, but it's Brightspace. So as we moved to Brightspace, the decision was made that we were going to use Teams moving forward. And so I just wanted to have some experience with Teams because all of my experience had been using Collaborate.
Okay. So I used WebEx, and the reason I picked WebEx is that the class I was teaching, there's a pretty high learning curve for many of the students learning Adobe products. We had a brand new LMS with Brightspace. And I had a very similar feeling that too much change might not be good, but also that we were moving our graphic design program to a fully online offering. And I wanted, my area wanted to make sure that all of the classes that were offered for the graphic design program looked and felt the same. And so to change that completely would sort of throw off that. So I stuck with WebEx, but I would say that another reason that I was okay with sticking with WebEx instead of Engagely, because I do think Engagely is super awesome, was that I use VoiceThread a lot. And VoiceThread allowed us, I started to use VoiceThread as a part of this in the synchronous time of class as well. So that a student who wasn't there and posted work to VoiceThread, we would use that and the tools within VoiceThread to engage with them, and then they could come to it whenever they wanted.
Since we only have 15 minutes left, we got started a little late. I mean, I had a bunch of questions, but I'm actually more curious to hear your questions. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take two from the folks that are here in Syracuse, and then we'll take two from the folks that are online. And then if I get to my questions, great. But if not, that's okay too. So Lisa Stevens, did you have a question about Engagely? I'll repeat the questions. Yeah, so the question was, could students see the conversations going on in Engagely as it was happening?
It depends on the conversation. So if they're, while at the table, while I'm at the podium, they can communicate with their table mates. And so that conversation is just at their table. Okay, so you couldn't see that. I believe I could see color movement, which would indicate something's happening there, but I'm not hearing them. When you're in table mode where, so there's a podium mode and a table mode. When I go to table mode, it's pretty much sending them to breakout rooms. And for those of you who use Zoom or Teams, so you're sending them to breakout rooms. At that point, I can monitor all of them. I'm seeing colors and seeing a table that's active. I'm able to see the individuals, how active they're at their table. And then I can join a table similar to Zoom. I can go in and move around and interact with the different groups. So for example, they're able to share their screen just like they would with Zoom. I just have the ability to observe more and jump in if needed based on, for example, the table is just very inactive or a particular student is very inactive. I can sort of jump in or invite that student to join me at the staff table, but you're able to sort of still monitor without necessarily being at the table.
I will say that as far as the student feedback, for those that used Engagely, they loved the tables. All I heard about was tables, and I wasn't familiar with the tool until I read the comments and was like, what is this tables thing? And why does it keep showing up? The students loved that feature.
Anybody here else? Yeah.
So obviously, you all mentioned recording, and we heard about that really strongly in the student responses and faculty responses. So were you just leaving straight video there? Did you go back and do any editing for the synchronous portions? And how have you tracked that to see that students actually do stuff with it?
So the question is, did you do any editing on any of the recordings, and were you able to track student engagement with recordings?
I can speak to recording. So when I initially started, I had been recording everything that I've done for many, many years, so it was not new to me. But when I first started with the HyFlex, I would record the whole class, like the whole session. And what I learned later on was that to compartmentalize, so when I did one topic, then you could just stop the recording and then start it again. And with WebEx, they'll give you those all delivered separately. And then I could just label them and deliver them in those smaller bites like I would in an online class.
I recorded all the sessions, and in order to kind of monitor the students that were asynchronous, what I had them do was they had to go to a discussion board, and after they watched the video, they had to write 3 things that happened in class. And so I'd go back and read a selection of those, and if a student was always writing 3 things that happened in the first 5 minutes of class, then I would, talk to the student about whether or not they were actually interacting with the video and things of that nature. And so the students took to it really well. And there's some funny things that they'll write about, something you misspeak, or something strange happens during class, and they'll bring that kind of thing up. And those are often the kind of things that I see in the responses for the 3 things that they remembered in class.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I feel sort of inadequate in some respects, because I turned on the Zoom recording at the beginning of the class, and I turned it on to the end of the class, and I got the link and posted it. Because there are 4 credit classes. I spend 4 hours a week in the class, and that kind of takes up the teaching budget to a certain extent. I even objected in some respects, and I hope it gets fixed. And we're still in Blackboard. I hope it gets fixed. That I had to go find that link after class and post it to my class, because I found that doing that even for the asynchronous students was sometimes more of a burden than I met every week. And students say, "Where's the recording?" Oh, I forgot to do it because it didn't come up. That comes up really quickly. I kind of don't think that that's the best way to do it. And so if I do this again, I won't do it that way. But that's lessons learned, right? I think that's just creating content for asynchronous students is fundamentally different than creating a class for synchronous students, and doing both at the same time is a pretty high burden. And I can't say that my experiences led me to conclude that it's less of a burden. Zoom's gotten way better in terms of sharing the recordings. It's not on the laptop, without the way for it to convert, all that stuff is good. But still have to manually post the link. And even to start during class. I got to the point where I set an alarm in my phone saying, start the recording, because otherwise, if you forget a class, that's a disaster. So, I have all my Zooms are automatically recorded, but then I start class 10 minutes early, so I put it on pause. And so I guess that's classroom management.
I tried to have the students help me, and so what I always started class the exact same way. I would always say, "I'm starting the recording," and I told the students, if you don't hear me say that at the beginning of the class, please bring it to my attention. And so it only happened once or twice, but they were really on top of it. And a couple of times that I didn't remember to start the recording, 2 minutes in, somebody's like, "Hey, did you start the recording?" And it worked out good.
I check with my asynchronous students. I do this thing called a fess up. There's no punishment. I have no judgment. And I really try very hard to own that. I just have them fill out a survey every week if they're asynchronous. How much time did you spend watching the recordings? Are they helpful? What could I do better on that? And they were very honest. One kid was like, You know, and other ones were like, you know, I know to forward, because when we would switch to group work and things, they would say like, you know, I wouldn't edit the recording. And so they would say, you know, there was really only about, because I would teach Tuesday and Thursday, so that's an hour and 20. There was only about 40 minutes that I needed to watch, and the rest was some other stuff. So I don't know, fast forwarded through that. I'd love to do the version where it clips it, and you know, because I do a couple of activities in each class.
So Zoom does that with chapters kind of automatically. It's not bad. So the chapters in Zoom are, you know, they're pretty good. And in fact, they're good enough.
Students wanted me to put it up on YouTube because YouTube chapters are.
Yeah. Zoom chapters. I don't know when they started chaptering, but and you can also use the transcript to, and I didn't quite figure out how to put marks into the transcript and say, well, just go to this point in the class. And I'm working on that. The students I find do navigate the transcripts, and you know, and I'll put in some post-class notes and go to this section. I don't remember what time of it, but took these words in the transcript. And I took to putting verbal bookmarks, if you will, during the class, so that when, and I said, these are searchable terms like part 3 now, and then they can search the transcript for now. But that's pretty, I find that kind of lame. I wish I was better at making it easier for students.
Do we have time for me to jump
Sure,
in?
yeah.
So with the design of my class, it's a flipped classroom design. So they're getting pre-recorded lectures, their activities, all those stuff. And then we're meeting in the live session. And the goal is, I think, pair share activities. So taking advantage of those tables and those breakout room was the goal. For me, I do a brief recap of where you should be with your, it was a course long project, where you should be with your course. Here are the key areas, and then here's the outline of how we're going to focus for our think, pair, share activity. Go to breakout rooms. And so with that, there's no recording once they're in the breakout rooms. So, and then we would regroup as a larger group and sort of discuss what did you learn, you know, how's this going to impact your project. And so the recordings were fairly short, and I guess it's already broken up for them, because here's your overcap. I mean, so here's your overview of where you should be, and then they're getting the regroup. So it's the beginning and end of the class session that's then in the recording for them. And then the second question was, how are students engaging with that? I had maybe 2 students who watched the recordings, but it wasn't a deal breaker, because there was a discussion board that was required but what we were doing in the think, pair, share, because I know we had asynchronous students, was that the individuals who reported out for their groups were required to post to the discussion board to allow feedback as well from the asynchronous students. So there were multiple avenues in which you're getting the material and multiple avenues in which you're interacting with your peers and the material. And so for me, it wasn't a deal breaker if you didn't watch the session, but at least participate in some other shape or form for the course.
Yeah, I have to say, when we had discussions with the full group of folks, it was really, that was a topic of some debate among the faculty participants, how to kind of keep track of asynchronous students in the course of teaching the course. And, you know, I don't think there's any one right answer. I think, you know, you've heard a lot of great responses to that already. So Lori, any online
Yes,
Zoom
there were
questions?
online questions throughout. It looks like we're running out of time, but a lot of people asked about physical setup of the classroom, right? So
Okay.
people are very curious about that. Also, questions about technical support, or like a TA or someone to help moderate. And then a question about, was there any change in workload allocation from a typical synchronous or asynchronous class?
So we got classroom setup. These are big topics too. Classroom setup, or and then the other was a support that you had in the classroom as you're teaching the course, and then any kind of did you get any sort of release or compensation from your campus for teaching a HyFlex course? Right, those were the questions. Okay.
I'd love to do my classroom because my college tried very hard to be supportive, and there was one huge issue for me personally. I can go quickly to the no extra compensation, grateful for the stipend, and a lot more work for the first time. Worth it in my opinion, but I'm very comfortable with tech. So for me, I had people come and observe me and they just said, no, that's not gonna happen. Like they were not ready to have and I have ADHD. And so for me, it was very like I had to kind of get my brain around it. But in my classroom, I had a smart board behind me. I had the camera in front of me and I have 2 screens here. So I saw a meme the other day that said I wanted to make my classroom cozy. So I put a fireplace on the screen and it looked like I was burning in hell. And to some extent, it felt like that. I didn't need, but what I really needed was, this is my teaching board, right? So I have my material up there. Those 2 needed to be my students' faces. They really did, because of the way that we are in my classroom. And you're such a dope doing it. I kept turning around to watch the kids at home so that the kids in the room and the kids at home all got my back, because I wanted to see the students when we were all talking. So one workaround for that with me was that thank goodness in our college, everybody can technically get a laptop until they run out. So any students who didn't, I made sure everybody had one, and anyone who was in the room, anyone who was sacred as home, we were all available on the laptop. So we would break out in groups, and it wasn't, okay, you people at home go in this group, you people, everybody signed in, everybody was together. So there was a real community involved. So that helped them somewhat with where the faces were. It did not help me. So that would be my #1 begging is, could you make it so that I could see my kids and the other
We
screens?
did that at SUNY Poly, and one of the things that maybe does work at Poly is that the room that I teach in is fabulous. I got it down. It takes me 9 minutes now to walk in and get it all set up. But there's, I think, 7 screens that I have to monitor, but I can see the online students by looking in the back of the room. The camera is focused on the in-class students, not individually, but the classroom, so the online students can see the other students in class. I run my own laptop, so I've got, when I sit when I teach, I've got a close-up of me teaching, and then behind me is the screen that I'm sharing from my laptop. So plus the projector, I mean, by the time you get in there, it takes a little while to get it set up, but I think that's the only way I can imagine teaching in a HyFlex. If I don't have to turn around and see my students, but I can see them out basically in the back row of their class. All I see, of course, is their non-camera participation. That's another story. But at least I see when they raise their hands or something like that. And that's the only way I can engage both the synchronous and the in-person students. And so I think the room is critically important. It also has to be mic'd for sound. So I mean, if it's not mic'd for sound, no hope. And we, like I said, we use, I think that room has 2 cameras built in, so either professor camera and audience camera, but I ended up using a 3rd camera for my laptop for myself. And short of that, I don't know that I could do. So once you're used to something like that, this is the minimum. So I now set up my schedule around that room. Because I can't imagine doing it in another room.
Yeah, maybe each of you go and then we'll have to stop. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I was just going to add that I have a good setup in one of our classrooms that is a WebEx setup, so we could see the student. That wasn't an issue. The positioning was good. We're all on computers, computer class, so that really helped. But one tool that I would suggest people look into, because not all of our classes are HyFlex, but we teach HyFlex in other studio rooms. And so what we've found is that iPad Pros on dollies with wheels, like a tripod that you would use a camera on that moves fluidly with you through the classroom, can be really helpful. And even if you don't have a sound bar in the room, the sound on the iPad Pro through WebEx is way better than our high-end laptops or the high-end computers in the room. And the update on the iPad Pro now, it follows you a little bit as well. So you have that sort of flexibility of setting it aside, moving back from it, still everyone being able to hear and interact. So something we'll get to.
We had the luxury at SUNY Downstate in that the School of Public Health a few years ago had or brand new state of the art School of Public Health building. And so when we needed to move to HyFlex, we were like, aha, it's already set up. So one main issue we had for larger classrooms is that there's no ceiling mic, but we'd sort of get around it with either handheld mics or passing out the lapel for like 1 or 2 students per show. And then because I was teaching a smaller class with 15, and I also scheduled the classrooms for HyFlex. So I was able to pick one of the cozy conference rooms that we teach in. And so for that, it was pretty intimate. We have the ceiling mics, we had, the camera, everything was cozy. So it worked. There's a second. The support, so again, because we're already set up for that, the support was there in terms of in class. I think that I understand the issues that are being mentioned regarding senior students and that sort of thing, which I've experienced with Zoom. But with Engagely, when you're sharing your screen, it's within the interface that already has the students. And so you weren't worrying about not seeing the chat, not seeing your students, because it's all in one interface. I'd say when I started initially, it was because I was moving from Zoom to Engagely, it was like, oh my God, there's just too many things happening. But in the session, you can see your students, you can see your screen, you can see all the things that you need to see, the responses, the notes, the chats, all of those things. So having it in one screen made it worth while. So for me, it wasn't, having to factor all those different things, needing a student to moderate or anything, because it's all in that one screen for you.
Well, thank you all for being here. I think it's a great session. Now, I can restore the group.
Thank you all very much for this really informative panel. We have another session coming up tomorrow on a HyFlex model called ActiveFlex is Mark Gale in the room yet? He will be, and his instructional designer will be here to talk about their modification of the HyFlex model to address some of the issues that you all brought up. So I hope you will come. I hope you'll be here for that session. It's now time for lunch. I'm very happy to be able to have lunch all together. And for our virtual audience, thank you so much for being here. We are going to stop now the streaming and go have some lunch virtually or in person together, and then we'll be back in an hour approximately. Thank you very much, everyone. Chris.
Oh, yeah, come in and lurk over the back there.